I'm so excited to welcome you all to Happy Go Lucky at Heart podcast. I have a mission to support others with undiagnosed autism to get a diagnosis because my mum fought a long battle. But please don't go, because this podcast is for absolutely everybody, especially mental health too. And I mean everybody, because I will share with you lots of unique yet personal stories from all age groups. So please meet your host, Vicky Kidson, otherwise known as me. Buckle up, because it's going to be a long mission. So enjoy and live life to the full. So to start off in this episode, for the start of Black History Month, I'm going to talk about women who changed the world in history. And I'm going to start off with Black women power slaves who escaped and led their country into abolishing slavery. I will be talking about Harriet Tubman, Mary Prince, and Josephine Baker. Today is the start of Black History Month in the United States. Country that continues to have racial unrest and turmoil. First, I'm going to talk about use of Demerara sugar in bacon has a long history, dating back to the Demerara 1823 slave rebellion. This rebellion, organised by Cromamere and Jack Gladstone, was an attempt by enslaved individuals to gain their freedom using only primitive weapons against the more heavily armed slave masters. During the rebellion, one slave was tortured and forced to reveal information about Cromamere and Jack's plans. Cromamere was eventually shot and killed, and his body was left to rot in the sun. The rebellion ultimately failed, but the memory of Cromamere and Jack and the other participants has been used to advocate for anti-slavery ever since. Did you know that the word zombie has its origins in the name of a French slave trader and assassin, Jean Zombie? After his death, he became the inspiration for this folklore. It is uncertain when society will stop using language that is discriminatory or offensive. Napoleon's brother-in-law is known with constructing the first gas chamber, which he used to kill Haitian prisoners using a mixture of fire and sulphur. Natasha Lightfoot stated that the concept of liberty was empty in the only colony where it was granted, Antigua. In the Demerara 1823 slave rebellion in the British colony of Jamaica, hundreds of people were punished, with soldiers killing 354 prisoners and wreaking destruction on the Jamaica population. Despite the loss of life in this attack, an additional 600 individuals were concerned about becoming victims themselves. These individuals were subjected to the same systemic violence, cruelty, and greed as the British inflicted on their own country. In 1838, the British colony of the Caribbean granted liberty to its black population. I remember the first time I went to the Caribbean. This beautiful lady came up to me and wanted to braid my hair. She told me how much she loved my hair and that it was really such a privilege for me. We were in such a rush for the cruise ship back, only 10 minutes to stop and chat. So the wonderful lady said, "What do you want to know about the slave times?" I said no, but Mum quickly adapted the conversation and said she was home educated only from Christmas last year. "Sure," I said, "we're a bit rushed, so we should get going." She then quickly braided my hair before we had a conversation about the colonial tyranny. I am very lucky as I have a highly educated mother and was homeschooled since 2008 due to not following the curriculum than regular schools use. I'm extremely privileged in that way. I'll never forget what she told me, that braiding was a way of forgiving, a form of love during such hard times. We all wanted to show that we cared enough to teach them this skill when they were being tortured. For generations, African hair braiding has been an act of forgiveness. If slaves start to tell the truth about other slaves and their escape plans, all the torturous techniques that were used against them, like whipping. This is what they had to go through. The braiding was shown as an act of forgiveness, and of course they added food like corn seeds into their braids, also known as cornrows, to hide their food when they were separated from family for a very long time. They often didn't have access to food. I was telling this lady in the Caribbean about the cotton trade and Robert Clive, who reportedly committed suicide at the age of 49 due to the jealousy of his colleagues in Parliament over his wealth. We learnt a lot from our Caribbean family holiday, and we both took something we learned in 10 minutes. Breathe, Victoria. Anyway, on to the next. So, Harriet Tubman, born into slavery in 1820 or 1822, was one of the first powerful women in history. She escaped slavery and dedicated her life to rescuing others using various techniques in addition to the Underground Railway Quilt Code, which is a controversial theory. She relied on trustworthy individuals, both black and white, to help her stay hidden and pointed her in the direction of others she could trust. To evade capture, she travelled on foot, horseback, by wagon, boat, and train, always under cover of darkness and using disguises to avoid being identified. In 1849, she escaped to Philadelphia and became part of a network of people who helped slaves escape. They had lists of safe places and routes that were kept secret. At least 13 times, Harriet returned to Maryland to rescue family and friends. By 1860, her reputation as a liberator was so well known that enslaved Africans referred to her as Moses. She was a Moses of her people. She also managed to keep her work a secret for over 10 years, taking enormous risks to free slave families. Harriet Tubman was highly regarded by abolitionists and played a key role in the Civil War. She was the first woman to lead a military expedition in June 1863, freeing more than 700 slaves. She also served as a Union scout, spy, and nurse, and married a Union soldier named John Tubman, who was also born into slavery. Even before the Civil War, she fought for the rights of women, minorities, and the disabled, and was a suffragist who advocated for women's rights. She changed her name from Araminta to Harriet and Harriet Tubman when she married. Let's normalise changing our names. I changed my middle name and surname to move on from what happened to me and social services and my dad. It should be a fresh start, not an abandonment of your character. I used to be Victoria Ann Gilding, and now I have my mum's surname Kidson and my grandma's middle name Gwendolyn. I wanted more of a maternal side to my name, but I am still a Victoria. In 1859, she moved to Auburn, New York, where she cared for her elderly parents and later opened a nursing home for African Americans on her property. Despite a $40,000 bounty being offered for her capture, on October 3rd, 1849, an advertisement offering a reward for the capture of Minty, Ben, and Harry was published in Maryland. Their minstress, Eliza Brodus, promised to pay for each of them if they were caught outside of the state. However, slave owners were unaware that Minty was actually Harriet Tubman. The $40,000 bounty for Tubman was fabricated by Sally Holly, a former American anti-slavery activist, in a letter to a newspaper in 1867. She argued for Tubman to receive back pay and a pension from the Union Army. To put this amount in perspective, the US government offered a $50,000 reward for the capture of John Wilkes Booth, who assassinated President Lincoln in 1865. In today's currency, $40,000 would be worth several million dollars. If the reward had been legitimate, Truman would have been captured and the advertisement would have appeared in every newspaper in the country. The dead or alive poster is therefore a myth. Truman was never caught, and her true identity was never revealed to slave owners. She suffered from lifelong headaches, pain, and seizures after being hit on the head with a brick at the age of 12 while trying to protect an elderly slave from abuse. Truman died on March 10, 1913, and is buried in Auburn, New York. Her favorite color was orange, and she enjoyed milk, and her favorite song was Swing Low, Sweet Chariot, which held special meaning for enslaved people, and it was seen as a sign that liberation was coming soon. Now on to the next. So Mary Prince was born into slavery, and her mother was owned by Charles Miners. Her father was a sawyer who worked in a shipbuilding. She was sold multiple times and spent time in St. Vincent before being freed from a sugar plantation on November the 5th, 1828, around the age of 40. As an infant, she was given as a gift to Darrell Williams' granddaughter, along with her mother, and was hired to a neighbor until she was 12 years old. After Williams died, he sold her to another slave master in Spanish Point, where she worked in the salt ponds of Turks Islands. She was then sold again and returned to Bermuda before being sold to John Wood of Antigua. Mary joined the local Moravian church and married a free carpenter and cooper named Daniel James in December 1826. They were freed from slavery and arrived in England in 1828, but Mary continued to work for the Woods, who were based in London. When Mary expressed a desire to work for the Anti-Slavery Society, Wood refused to let her go. The Society petitioned Parliament on 24th of June 1829 to force Wood to grant Mary a manumission, but the petition was unsuccessful and Wood left for Antigua before a public hearing. Mary decided to remain in England because if she returned to Antigua, she would still be a slave. She managed to escape the Wood household in 1831. Some of Mary Prince's famous quotes as a storyteller are: "All slaves want to be free. To be free is very sweet. I have been a slave myself. I know what slaves feel. I can tell by myself what other slaves feel and by what they have told me. The man that says slaves be quite happy in slavery, that they don't want to be free, that man is either ignorant or a lying person. I never heard a slave say so." Mary Prince's book was the focus of 2 court cases involving libel and defamation of character. The first case was brought by her benefactor Thomas Pringle against Black Woods magazine, and the second was brought by Mary's owner, John Adams Woods, against Pringle for defamation of character. Despite these legal challenges, Mary's account of the abuse and brutality she suffered was never discredited. Her wounds of abuse remained visual on her skin until she died. She used religion to convince the British that black people were human beings. Some of the quotes from the Bible she might have used were Exodus 21:16. "Whoever steals a man and sells, and anyone in possession of him, shall be put to death." Initially, religion was used to keep slaves as slaves. As quoted in Peter 2:18, St. Peter, "Slaves, be subject to your masters with all the reverence, not only to those who are good, equitable, but also those who are perverse." The Bible is so contradictory. Moving on to one of my favourite civil rights activists, Josephine Baker. Baker was a trailblazer in many ways. Not only was she a successful performer and entertainer, but she also made a significant impact in politics and social justice. As a spy for the French resistance during World War II, she used her status as an entertainer to gather valuable information. And as a civil rights activist, she fought tirelessly against segregation and discrimination, both in the US and abroad. Despite facing obstacles and criticisms, she raised a family of 12 adopted children from all over the world and refused to conform to anyone else's expectations. At home, Baker faced discrimination and segregation, unable to even enter certain hotels or order a cup of coffee solely due to her skin color. Outraged by this unjust treatment, she embarked on a tour of the United States in 1951, using her platform to actively combat segregation and discrimination. Baker later returned to America to actively participate in the civil rights movement, standing alongside figures such as Martin Luther King Jr. She was the only female speaker at the March on Washington in 1968, where she recognized the contributions of women in the fight for civil rights. In her speech, Baker shared her own experiences of fighting for justice in front of 250,000 people. Gazing at the diverse crowd, she proclaimed, "Salt and pepper, just how it should be." She also said, "Surely the day will come when colour means nothing more than the shade of one's skin, when religion is seen solely as a way to express one's soul, when birthplace holds no more weight than a roll of the dice, and all men are truly born free." Josephine Baker was praised as the most sensational woman anybody ever saw or ever will. Growing up in poverty in St. Louis, Missouri in 1906, Josephine Baker had to make her living by dancing on the street. But her persistence paid off when she landed a role in a vaudeville act after begging a show manager for a chance. This opportunity led her to travel to New York and kickstart her career, despite the prevalent racial segregation in the American South. While starting her career in New York was a positive step, Josephine found her true breakthrough in Paris, where she migrated in her late teenage years to escape the racism she faced in America. She excelled in the City of Lights, finding great success in her dancing career. Additionally, it was while residing in Europe that Josephine expanded her artistic pursuits, delving into singing and acting. Josephine chose to remain in Europe even as World War II broke out and joined the French military intelligence agency. She utilized her status as an entertainer to travel throughout Europe and used her charm to gather valuable information, often recording it in invisible ink on sheet music. After the war, Josephine returned to the United States and became a prominent figure in the civil rights movement. She used her platform as a performer to speak out against segregation and discrimination, and worked closely with organisations such as the NAACP. She also made a bold statement by refusing to perform in venues that were not fully integrated. Additionally, she began adopting children from different races and backgrounds, creating a diverse and multicultural family that she called the Rainbow Tribe. Josephine Baker passed away in Paris in 1975. Her contributions were recognised by France, who honoured her with a state funeral, making her the only American-born woman to receive this honour. Thank you for listening to this episode, and I hope you enjoy my first episode for Black History Month. I got an exciting month. I've got some interviews with Dr. Lucrezi, who's a speaker at ADHD Women's Palooza, and we're going to talk about racism and ADHD and mental health. And then Lafaya, who we're going to talk about neurodiversity and relationships. And then Jordan, who is in Los Angeles, who owns Brilliant Species, a clothing brand to raise awareness of people with disabilities. I'm going to talk about the entrepreneurship and racism and stuff. So stay tuned for a exciting month I've got in store. I hope you enjoy this episode. I'll see you again. Bye. Yet another wonderful interview. Much obliged for you to stay and listen to Happy Go Lucky at Heart podcast. If you enjoyed the show, please keep on boasting about it to your friends and family. And if you have any spare time, please help an independent podcaster get known. So please leave a 5-star review on whichever podcast platform you listen on, and click the link in the show notes for many more ways to connect with me. Bye! Mwah!